Hello, students. Welcome to Newton to Heidegger, part 2 of our trip down the philosophy lane. There's a few definitions that you'll need to be clear on in order to understand the upcoming philosophers' opinions and such. You should know what a proposition is. A proposition is a logical judgment or something, simply a statement about two or more terms, a subject and a predicate. For example, you have a bachelor is sitting in a chair. The subject is bachelor and the predicate is sitting in the chair. Now that's a proposition or a judgment about the subject, a bachelor, who is actually sitting in the chair, the predicate. In other words, a proposition is a proposed logical judgment of at least two terms, the bachelor sitting in the chair. So you can have groups of premises that lead to a conclusion, and actually at the end of this semester, you'll be creating some premises to make an argument. So two types of propositions. For instance, this is a very simple one you find everywhere. Premise 1, all humans are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates was human. So therefore the conclusion is that Socrates was mortal. So those are propositions, premises, and conclusions. And as you know, in epistemology, what we're really looking at is what is knowledge? How do we come to know what we know? How do we deal with it? Is it accurate? In the upcoming theorists and philosophers, this was an essential question. How is it that we come to learn? How is it that we understand? And is it truthful? Is it accurate? And what do we have if reason is not enough to truly understand? If there's a limit on understanding, what is there after that we can count on? So with epistemology, there are three types. There's the a priori knowledge. This is what Kant calls pure intuitions. This is how we use logic and reason to reach a conclusion. It's not based on experience. A posteriori is really the information that we gain from experience, seeing, smelling, etc. And then there's innate knowledge. I think we talked about this with Plato's theory of the forms. Many early beliefs, and actually still transcends today, believe that we are actually born with all of the knowledge that we need, and it is our job, if you will, or position in life to obtain that knowledge from inside our brain, bring it out, test it, and learn more from it. But then again, you probably already knew this from your innate knowledge. So again, this is just a slide that sort of reviews a priori versus a posteriori, which we'll talk a lot about today. A priori is pure proposition, does not rely on experience. And moreover, the proposition can be validated by experience, but it is not grounded in experience. Therefore, it is logically necessary that we must accept it. And Hume calls this a tautology. All bachelors are unmarried, because it's true. A bachelor is an unmarried male, and an unmarried male is a bachelor. That's called a tautology. Now, we know this to be true because we can't go out and interview all bachelors to see if indeed they're unmarried. We just come to accept that it's true. A posteriori proposition is a proposition whose justification does rely on experience. So the position is validated by and grounded in experience. Therefore, it is logically contingent or conditional, i.e. you need more context. The example here is a man is sitting in a chair. Well, that's a proposition. The man is sitting in a chair. I can now go through my experiential voice and confirm that the man is sitting in the chair. And so that's an a posteriori way of coming upon knowledge and understanding. And then concept terms actually are like units that develop into concepts. So to make a judgment, one must compare something, a term. To have a term, one must be able to conceptualize something. And then to conceptualize something, One must have observed the attributes or properties of an object or imagined something. Remember, back to the first class, we talked about assimilation and accommodation. The clown and the balding male. So that's sort of how terms, right, bald, can develop into concepts, clowns, and then you begin to get bigger concepts that not every balding man is a clown, right? So in general, there are two types of concepts. There's the empirical, observed, and the rational, imagined. And then a category, which we talked a little bit about with Locke, is a class of things that share properties. And the sharing of properties actually goes on to develop concepts. Now, be clear about this because you need to definitely know the difference between the empiricists and the rationalists. Empiricists, as you can imagine, are empirical. So the sense is direct knowledge. All truth must be sensed. They are a posteriori. Locke is a perfect example. In fact, he believed that there is no innate ideas. The mind is a blank state, a blank slate at birth. It is impossible to know everything because we cannot experience everything, and they often are inductive thinkers. And some empiricists are Locke and Hume, who we'll talk about today. And then there's the rationalists. Plato was, of course, one of our first rationalists, and then Descartes was from last presentation. In his Cartesian thinking, was a rationalist. They believe that we are born with innate ideas, and it is the researcher's job to find that knowledge, bring it out, and test it by intuitively believing that the a priori knowledge is true. Perfect example of this is math and logic. It's not tangible, it's not truly empirical, because we cannot sense it, but yet it is truth. And they are often deductive. So again, empiricists tend to think inductively, which is oftentimes fallible. Because just because you saw 4 white swans, you can then say all swans are white. Well, we know that that's not necessarily true, because in Australia, or if you'd seen the movie Black Swan, that there are indeed black swans. So inductive thinking has its problems with validity, and the scientific method, of course, is also an empiricist model and often utilizes inductive thinking. Rationalists, on the other hand, knowledge is developed through logic and deduction. Premise 1 leads to premise 2, which leads to number 3, which then leads to a conclusion. So here you have the hypothesis, and you develop evidence to support the theory. There's a great little video here if you want to look at the difference between empiricists and rationalists. Now, we left off last podcast with Newton. I just wanted to bring it back again just to refresh our memories, because indeed this was probably one of our largest paradigm changes in the 15th and 16th century. I'm sorry, 18th century. Prior to Newton, people only trusted oracles and religion. And he believed in a reductionist, mechanistic way of studying things. He started to make the scientific method more refined. He was able to put the physical universe first so scientists could study and actually control it. Math became a source of true knowledge, even if we couldn't directly see it, and that's new. He used math to answer problems and dilemmas in the physical world, then built models that could explain what was not directly observable, the a priori world. Not the other way around, that the world is ordered by God and theories are developed to support the genius of God. One thinks of Pythagoras and his math and triangles supported the divinity of God. Here now Newton is criticizing the oracles of earlier belief. Here Newton believed that man could break down complex abstractions into simpler experiments and develop a scientific basis for life. And then eventually laws and gravity of motion led to the theory of relativity, which really will be the next paradigm shift. Now Locke was influenced by Newton, and he developed what is known as the Newtonian science of the mind in his Human Understanding essay. He definitely believed that the mind is a blank slate and rejected Descartes' ideas. He wants to know, how does the mind become furnished? He accepts intuition as a way of knowing. What enters the mind first is sensation, which over time develops into what becomes complex understandings. Here we have sort of this understanding of the Newtonian science of gravity and motion. And Locke believed that these associations in the brain could be held together much like in the material world, utilizing Newtonian science of gravity and motion. That these elementary sensations could be coalesced in the mind by Newtonian science to form complex ideas or knowledge, i.e., concepts, and that sensations are held together by association, that what we do repetitively are closely aligned with each other. And understanding is then furnished by ever more complex ideas, grouped sensations. However, fundamental to Locke's belief of these associations that create understanding is, can we trust the sensations? Can we trust the intuitive way of knowing and our experiences? Locke believed that, like much of the material, I actually did that. Yeah. So, to Locke, in order for the brain to be able to understand, he developed these primary and secondary qualities. As an empiricist, everything must enter the mind from the senses. So he developed primary qualities of an object, for instance, are, if you're holding an apple, its hardness, its denseness, its height, and its weight. But then there are also qualities that inform the mind that are known as secondary qualities. Color, taste, smell, they're not empirical. They're experiences which enter the mind through primary qualities but inform the mind. Is an apple red? Is an apple sweet or bitter? Crunchy or crisp? These secondary qualities are fallible and interpreted differently in each person. So, personal identity, the mind, who we are unto the world, is chiefly a collection of associations of sensations, right? The grouped together associations, either arrived at by primary or secondary means. Now, but here's where we challenge our perceptions. What do you see here? Do you see a bird or do you see a goat? So this is what Locke was concerned about. It's okay to understand that we must attain our knowledge and our understanding through experience, but can experience be trusted? And I think everyone probably will remember the recent internet phenomenon of the blue dress and the gold dress. So I'll leave you to talk about that later. Perceptions are different amongst people. Now Hume came along and he worked, as did Locke, carried on Locke's work. Sensory perceptions must enter the brain. But he also believed that repeated sensory perceptions are grouped together in associations in the brain. He really looked at causality. He looked at, if, for instance, if A, then B. So Pavlov, remember Pavlov's dogs, if the bell rang, then the dog got the food. Soon the bell equals food. And these become habits of the mind, but should not be trusted. Because, however, Hume says that we can never actually predict cause and effect. They are two totally separate events that may appear causal, but we cannot perceive causation. One day, for instance, the Pavlovian scientist might ring the bell and there will be no food. So cause and effect is inductive logic and often fraught with error. He actually became quite a skeptic and saw that these are limits of human reasoning. He also began to develop you see early beginnings of the self-deterministic model, that everything we do has a cause and effect outside of our experience. Or everything we do is actually based upon our prior experiences. We are therefore not true authors of our lives, as the choices we make in life are as a result of our past experiences. We do primarily do what makes us happy and benevolent, or a sense of utility. So he has this sense of his cause and effect in its inductive logic. It's fraught with error. One should be very skeptic about this sort of thought. And these are the limits of human reasoning. And you see the beginnings of morality being discussed with his self-determinism. And here is Hume's fork, and again, it's built upon the empiricists and the rationalists, but he calls it synthetic and analytic, Hume's fork. So that you either have to be a synthetic thinker or an analytic thinker. Analytic thinkers are rationalists and synthetics are empiric. So an empirical statement would be the dog is on the mat. And that's an a posteriori because sense of knowledge because we can see it. It's conditional because we can verify it. It's not trivial because it does tell us something about our world or our dog. However, it is not universal. Not every dog will be on a mat. And it could be confirmed to larger truths inductively. Now, analytically, the rationalists would say, well, 2 + 2 = 4. We can't empirically prove that. We know that to be true. It's because it's derived from reason. It's independent of experience. The statement may have function, but it is meaningless. And it is universal. It will always be true and always be necessary. So you can see the opposites in the synthetic and the analytic. And Hume said you're either an empiricist and you think synthetically, or you're a rationalist and you think analytically. And there's no crossing over. And then Kant said, well, no, I don't think that's necessarily true. So Kant said basically, that there's this world of phenomena that we see and experience, some of which is a priori as well as a posteriori. And then there's this world of noumena, the things that we could never know, unknowable, non-empirical, i.e. the metaphysics. So essentially, Immanuel Kant, who we'll talk about in a few minutes, crossed Hume's fork and said, took the strengths and weaknesses of both of these kinds of Hume's fork, and said, no, there's more to this. Now he called it the synthetic a priori. He said things that come to us are a priori. They can also be non-trivial, and they can also be universal. So in essence, he created what's known as a third dimension. And if you look at Godfrey Smith, page 20, in the book talks about Kant as a 19th century philosopher. 18th century, sorry. So Kant believed that the musings of Locke and Hume, that these concepts of association arranged haphazardly in the brain, will not work for a framework for understanding. So he went on to develop a framework of understanding in his critique of pure reason work in the 1780s. He developed a framework for understanding all human understanding. And within this framework is quantity, quality, relationship, modality. You can go and read about that at this point. But again, he took the musings of Locke and Hume and synthesized what was a dichotomy into this third dimension, if you will. And he also called it synthetic a priori or transcendental analytic because it transcended the empiricists and the rationalists' views on life. So basically, Kant would ask questions of like, what can I know? What can I do? What can I hope? What is enlightenment? He called enlightenment the intellectual freedom with maturity. It comes from pure reason. and goodwill. Again, you have the pure reason and a focus on how it is that we come to know, how is it that we understand, and then this essence of morality. So Kant takes mostly opposite stance from Hume, saying that while empirical data is useful, and that while all truths begin with the senses, we can only truly understand things using reason or rationalism. After all, our senses could be tricking us, as I showed you with the goat, the bird, and the gold blue dress. So Kant said that a billiard ball, for instance, moves, hits the second one, B, and the ball moves. However, we cannot say that the ball A caused ball B to move because we cannot see or feel what caused ball A to hit ball B to make ball B move. He said that a priori, we know that time and space informs our world. Time and space is what allowed us to be able to see the movement. Ball A moved, ball hit ball B moved. But the concepts of time and space are an a priori that inform our world. That is the merger. The way in which we see the world is through a priori concepts of time and space. So, in other words, although all knowledge begins with the senses, we can use our experiences to inform our reason and vice versa. We can't rely on our senses alone, nor can we rely on pure rationalism. We need both. And in essence, when Kant crossed Hume's fork, there was a new blend. That actually, this new blend, this synthetic a priori, saved the Newtonian laws of motion and gravity, which were not immediately embraced by everyone because they were not visible, they were not empirical. How could we trust this a priori notions that we cannot see or touch or feel or smell? So, we can accept Newton's a priori laws of gravity to predict new real world events that we can then observe to be true empirically. So, in essence, the end of the story is what? Modern science is the crossing of Hume's fork. I'll just let you read this. It's pretty much a review of what I was just talking about. So now you just wanted to mention briefly, because it's so much a part of both Hume and Kant, is that now you're starting to develop reason, but then they also discover morality, because morality has to do with what is good, how do we know what is good, and how do we make judgments that support reason and morality. So Hume believed that people are generally guided to be good. They want to be free from domination. I told you earlier that he also began to develop this model of self-determinism. Hume believed in self-determinism, not Kant. My apologies. People are shaped by their experiences, and their past experiences drive the choices of actions. Kant actually did not believe that. Kant actually believed that reason should be tempering our passions and our self-determinism, that we cannot basically say that because of the way in which we were raised or experienced things is that is why and how we respond. Most people would say that those are reactions. And in fact, Hume called these hypothetical imperatives. If you want to achieve a specific outcome, you must necessarily do that. If you're hungry, you'll eat. If you're thirsty, you'll drink. That these are hypothetical imperatives driven by our biophysical body, our natural being. But that Kant did not believe that these were part of true morality. Kant believed that reason tempered our passions. People are guided by goodwill. So in essence, he starts to expand morality. Kant believed that morality comes from within people, that we have an autonomy of the will, is what he called it. It's a necessary condition for morality. You must want to achieve good, and in order to achieve happiness, prudence is necessary. When you think about ethics, right, what would the prudent person do? You often hear that. That's Kantian theories. So he developed what's known as a categorical imperative. And an imperative is a law of sort. It's thou shalt not kill, for instance. It assumes, categorical imperatives assume that people are rational beings, so that they are fit for moral judgment, not just a desire or a passion or a biological function, as with Hume. For instance, a bartender has to give back the proper change to his customer, but if he thinks about, well, if I shortchange her, then I can save a little money. Kant would want to know why you thought about why you did give back the proper change. Did you give it back because you didn't want to get caught, or did you give it back for the larger picture of, well, if everybody did that, then this would be a terrible place to live. That people have this sense of reason that directs their morality. And then there's a short video on Hegel. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I thought it was very clever, so I'll have you look at this video. And then Husserl, you should be familiar with, developed phenomenology, the lived experience of something. I have you describe the world, subjects describe the world as they present themselves to us without our preconceptions. That's very important. And in the article by Lafont about exploring nurses' feelings on floating, she describes the phenomenological approaches of Husserl in interviewing float nurses. So they talk about the broad statements that they used, and then themes emerged, and those themes are listed here and are in the article. So this is a process called phenomenology, otherwise known as the lived experience of something. Very, very different approach than the scientific methods. Heidegger, who was a student of Husserl, actually radicalized Kant's perceptions that experience is shaped a priori by time and space. He took Husserl's phenomenology and applied it to more of an ontological question. Ontological question is, why are we here, right? It's nothing to do with, it's more essential. It has less to do with knowledge and learning, but why are we here? So Heidegger wanted to explore how it is that we come to be. First, you need to understand the person and become more ontological. So the questions that he would ask is, what does it mean to be at all? What makes it possible for there to be anything at all? And he believed that we, people, are time. The time and space element that Kant talked about as an a priori concept, he feels that people are time themselves. And through understanding over time, we begin to uncover what it is that will describe what and how people come to be. It's otherwise known as existential ontology, the ways of being in the world, as opposed to Kant's a priori understanding. It's more involved. And this is known as hermeneutics. And this form of research is more focused on the person or the subject and uncovering their being than methodology. It's freedom, in essence, from methodology, because the methodology, including the scientific method, might determine or limit our exploration. So it's being much more open to what sort of research questions we ask. What does it mean to be a person? Then how would we ask those questions? And then how would one answer those questions? Not to say we wouldn't use the scientific method, but we would challenge the methodology to be able to get at uncovering the being of that person. So I'm going to end here with, how do you see the world? Think about this. How do you endorse the received or the perceived view? We'll talk about this when we come to class. And definitely we'll talk about Perry and Belenky and moral and cognitive development. So I look forward to seeing you soon in class next week. And I hope you enjoyed this short podcast of tracing philosophers through time.